Welcome back to Normal Ireland Live. You don't need to adjust your screens. It is me, Callum Taylor, aka PolitiCal. I am delighted to be back hosting the show, and I'm joined this evening by the fantastic Noffel. How are you this evening? You well?
I'm doing well. It's Friday, so I'm looking well to binging some Andor season 2 all weekend. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to this new show as well.
Marvelous. I was going to say you're looking forward to the next hour with us as well. I'm sure.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
but hurry it up so you can get to Netflix, Disney Plus. I'm with you. Thanks, Noffel. Coming up on tonight's show. It appears that the party is for turning. Labour U-turn on the winter fuel allowance. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has accused Starmer, France and Canada of siding with Hamas and being on the wrong side of history. Slightly ironic. And Labour want to force chemical castration on sex offenders. As always, remember to like the stream, and if you're not a subscriber, please hit that button. We're trying to reach 40,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and we can do that, but we'll need your help. We will be getting to some of your comments at the end too, so please make sure to join in the conversation in the chat. But let's move on to our first story. Keir Starmer announced a government U-turn on Wednesday on the changes to the winter fuel allowance that Age UK claimed would force 100,000 pensioners into fuel poverty last winter. The Guardian writes, Keir Starmer has confirmed that he wants more pensioners to be eligible for winter fuel payments after a backlash against one of the most unpopular policies of the Labour government. The Prime Minister indicated in the Commons that he would look again at the £11,500 threshold, over which pensioners are no longer eligible for the allowance, as he tries to win back public support and quell a growing Labour backbench rebellion over benefit cuts. In short, Labour's offer of Tory-light policies in a country that desperately needs bold change was a bad idea. With approximately 10 million pensioners losing out on the payment since the changes came into force, Downing Street are yet to confirm just how many of that number will now be eligible again to claim the payment. And something else that still isn't clear is when these changes will be made. In Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday, Starmer announced that the changes would be part of a fiscal event, which does imply it will be the autumn budget rather than next week's spending review. And if it does take the government until October to enact these changes, there's no guarantee that the pensioners that currently don't have access to the winter fuel allowance will be able to claim it in time for this winter either, meaning we could be heading for a second winter with more pensioners in fuel poverty needlessly. Noffel, what are your thoughts on this U-turn from the government?
I think it's really interesting. Of course, we know that there's been a lot of pressure from the local elections and the Runcorn and Helsby by-election, in which Reform made massive gains. And obviously, people voted Labour massively for change and to get the Conservatives out. They didn't really want austerity 2.0. So, framing this as Keir Starmer said that this is about economic policy and the economy is doing really well under Labour is just nothing but a lie. They were the ones that were cheering on for this policy. It's flip flopping. It's quite disgusting, actually. I wouldn't even feel morally permissible to use the word U-turn. It's quite simply just trying to gain a voter base. And you know what? It's not going to work. Just like it didn't work to shift to the right and be told that, look, there's a £22 million black hole, which is fair. There needs to be some adjusting done on the economy. It doesn't justify moving more right. You need to move left. And this is exactly the same problem we're seeing with Labour time and time again. Starmer flip-flops and lies, and I don't think he's got very long left as a leader. Of course, we've seen multiple different reports talking about Angela Rayner and fractures within the Labour Party, and I think this really is Labour's downfall, or specifically Keir Starmer's downfall. Just quickly as well, it's really, really fascinating to see the language used months ago to justify this and the language used now. Because back then, they felt like they could get away by framing this as a moral thing, as putting the stress on the broadest shoulders type of thing, and somehow putting pensioners into that, right? But now they're framing it as if Labour are doing very, very well in the economy, and I don't think it's going to work, quite frankly. So what we need to look at here going forward is when it comes to this age demographic, the older demographic specifically, which parties are offering them something which Labour isn't? Because Labour's basically eviscerated, in my opinion, the support that they have with that certain demographic. And going forward, it looks like Reform's soaking that all up.
Hmm. It's interesting that you talk about the internal mechanisms and sort of factions within the Labour Party at the moment as well. I read a report just this morning that suggested that Keir Starmer is actually considering scrapping the two-child benefit cap, something that he effectively suspended 7 MPs for earlier, earlier in the his premiership, just after they got into power with the amendment on the King's Speech, and apparently it's Morgan McSweeney who is in his ear saying, no, 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 you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't do that. And I have heard on the grapevine that they're at odds over that issue as well. It just seems strange, doesn't it, that you've got people within the Labour Party having moral arguments with themselves as to whether they can justify taking benefits from the poorest of people, or you know, not putting 100,000 pensioners into fuel poverty, or I don't know, taking 300,000 children out of poverty overnight with scrapping the two-child benefit cap.
True.
Is this Labour Party just not the Labour Party that we used to know?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It isn't. There is no conceivable future where you were seeing around Corbyn's election period where you would think that Labour Party would have a soft coup with Starmer essentially and resort to going and turning their backs behind unions, on working class people, on the solidarity which has made Labour, and instead it's turned into a vessel for private contracts, BlackRock, and a bunch of shady private healthcare donations. Um, what's really, really interesting as well that I find about this is like you talked about the two child benefit cap, right? Because if the economy justifiably is looking good in some sort of way, according to Labour, then we should talk about different things like disability cuts, maybe restoring them. Two child benefit cap, as you talked about, could be in the works internally. If the economy is doing well, there is a real, if I put aside the moral, economic argument to say here, which is if you want economic growth, if you want a stable economy, you need stable workers, right? Taking away people's PIP, for example, it's just not going to do that. You're going to
Oh,
make people be far more stressed. You're going to put them on a waiting list on something that's already extremely stressful. You're going to make sure that they don't have that extra resources that they need to spend as a disabled person to get to work. So there is a real argument that someone can provide again to Labour, but it's not going to work because we know this wasn't done solely for economical reasons. It's because it was deeply, deeply unpopular. It was the first major policy that they came out with and defended very heavily. Reeves, Starmer, quite frankly, they put no space in it for the older demographic to kind of, I guess, put their argument forward. It's fascinating to me why they'd even think of that, considering it's the largest voter demographic. So going forward, it will be interesting just to see where exactly they can pick up on different arguments put forward by the opposition about a growing economy and whether or not there should be some reinstatement of benefits for other people.
well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we've just seen the trade deal with the European Union, and I think some people were expecting that the government might use that as sort of a springboard to announce some of these U-turns on planned cuts to benefits. Um, but from what I've seen so far, that isn't actually. I mean, tell me if you've seen something else, but that doesn't appear to be what Labour are doing. I've not seen any sort of confirmation. Yeah, we can now afford to do this because because we've made changes that have helped. It just appears to be more of a, oh yeah, well, we're thinking of doing this. And like you said, the initial reason that the government gave when they introduced the planned change to the winter fuel allowance was that it was about saving money, despite the fact that they also said they wanted to encourage more people to claim pension credits, which would make them eligible for the winter fuel allowance anyway, and would cost something like 3 times as much from the government purse as what they were going to save from means testing it in the way they did to begin with. So the idea from the offset that it was about finances was complete nonsense. But to then announce this U-turn, or this considered U-turn, because I suppose they've not changed the policy yet. They're saying that they're planning to do it. Let's see if they deliver. But then to not give any sort of indication of how they're going to fund it kind of tells us what we already knew, which is, like you say, it wasn't about the money to begin with, was it?
No, because Initially, the savings were about 1.5 billion pounds, which is really, really small amount for something this big, as in political backlash, right? And if we're taking a look at the Labour government's current finances under Reeves, it's not been good. The sort of fiscal headroom that you're leaving, especially with global events like we saw, it almost got abolished with the tariff that Trump put in place. It's really indicative of poor economic strategy that we have in this country. And to be fair, that really predates Labour, which is the lack of investment in any sort of public sphere, and the idea that borrowing money is terrible. You can't put more money into people's pockets to grow the economy. And it speaks to this. There's different economists that have talked about this, but it's called a death spiral, essentially, of the UK economy, where the idea is never to borrow, it's never to invest, but to create short-term gains for private companies or hand out contracts to people that will handle these public services less efficiently. What happens is you create bloat, for example, in the NHS with private contracts or with health and social care, and then you have someone else come in afterwards and say, we need to cut the state. That's all we've been doing, cutting more and more and more rather than investing. And it's really, really poor when you compare it to Spain, when you even compare it to France, how even Germany, which in some parts have struggling economies, it's a very uniquely British problem I think we're seeing here, where neoliberalism hasn't allowed for any small amount of forward growth into the public sector, and we keep asking and questioning ourselves why people are claiming benefits or PIP, for example, en masse, and it is because most of these people are on a waiting list, and this sort of thing predates Labour.
Now, listen. I mean, don't get me wrong. So I was. I would always. I would say I've always been in support of means testing something like the winter fuel allowance on the basis that it's means tested properly. There's no reason why people like Sir Alan Sugar, Lord Sugar as he is now, need the winter fuel allowance. But at the same time, the way that Labour introduced it and the really harsh cut-off point meant that, as Age UK said, 100,000 pensioners were going to then
Yeah.
drop into fuel poverty. Like, that isn't the way to do it. And actually, for the money that's saved from doing that, if you're going to increase the threshold anyway, for the admin of means testing it, just like with free school meals, it's probably more affordable to just give it out universally and give people the option to pay it back. So, if you are Lord Sugar and you don't need it, give them the option to pay it back. They can donate it back, or they can donate it to charity, or send it somewhere else, and maybe do it that way. But doing it in a way that hits 100,000 of people that are just on that breadline, that are just teetering on the edge, isn't the way to go about it. I do have to wonder though, and I'm interested to what you think of this. Do you think this is going to work? Because obviously it's clearly about trying to get votes back. They've clearly looked at the results of the local elections and gone, shit, we need to do something, and fast. Do you think this is the right decision to win votes back? Or do you think that this just further cements the fact that Labour are making bad decisions that people don't like and isn't going to make a difference?
Well, I think it's the complete wrong decision. It aligns to this idea, which is called Fishhook theory. So, for anyone unaware, essentially the idea is the center of politics moves right every time, because rather than trying to move to the left, neoliberalism just tries to reinvent itself. And this time around in Labour is unrecognizable because they've shifted right. The way to properly gain a footing against reform and to act as a vessel against rising fascism and the far right, such as reform, or even if you talk about Rupert Lowe, is to reinvent the left. Now,
Mm,
in my opinion, I don't think there's much of the left in Labour. They've purged a lot of them. They've removed the whip off a lot of them, and that's deeply worrying. You can't reinvent yourself in a Blairite way because public finances are so terrible right now, right? Especially after 2008, you don't have the opportunity to do that. So just the last thing I want to say on that is I don't think Labour personally are going to be a left-wing party anytime soon. But in theory, if they wanted to gain anything above reform, they would have to deeply commit to reforming what the left looks like today in a political party and putting forward a strong populist economic plan that is going to boost the average person's living standards within the UK. And without that, you're just going to concede more ground.
mm. And we're not going to get that from the Labour Party. You're right; it's not going to come anytime soon. The Greens may head in that direction, depending on the outcome of the leadership election in the summer. There's already a lot of talk at the moment of a Corbyn-led coalition, or possibly another left-wing party emerging over the next year or two as well. So there's definitely going to be a place for the left to fill that gap that Labour have left behind. And if anything is clear from the local elections at the beginning of the month, it's that we're now no longer in that two-party system. We are now in a political climate where the smaller, maybe less popular parties can break through and can win more seats. And that's because the two main parties that have had pretty much a monopoly over the political system for the last 100 years in this country, maybe not quite, are doing so badly that all of their core voter base, both for the Conservatives and the Labour Party, have gone, now we've had enough of this, and they're looking elsewhere. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not something can grow from the left to fill that gap. But thank you, Noffel. We should probably move on. Actually, before we do, if you're enjoying the show, then please like the stream. And if you're not a subscriber, hit that button.
For the last 45 years, there has been a massive transfer of wealth from the working and middle classes to the top 1%. Billions of pounds have been taken from the workers and handed to the economic elites. In 2008, the world came to a standstill. The market had failed. Capitalism was in crisis. Yet 16 years on, nothing has changed. The bankers weren't jailed, the banks were bailed out, ordinary people lost everything. It's 2025 and we are now reckoning with a Labour Party that seeks to implement a Tory agenda. We face rising right-wing forces, more division, more misinformation. Yet no one in the mainstream media wants to talk about the real issue, the economic elites who have increased their wealth while the rest of us have become poorer. This isn't just a crisis of inequality, it's a crisis of democracy. The rich aren't just getting richer, they're owning everything. We are facing a global oligarchy and nothing is being done. Why? Because of our media. The same oligarchs who hoard wealth also control our press and now our social networks. This is why independent media isn't just important, it's necessary. It's why we're calling on your support. Turn Left is an organisation run by 5 volunteers working around our full-time jobs. Your contributions have already made a huge difference, whether by covering rallies, producing vox pops and interviews, or upgrading our equipment. That's all possible because of you. But we can do so much more. We can be far more ambitious. So head over to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support, become a monthly supporter, or give a one-off donation. If you want to fight back against the billionaire class, then help us build a media for people, a media for planet, a media for socialism. Smash the oligarchs. Join Turn Left.
Now, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has launched a verbal attack on Keir Starmer and the leaders of France and Canada, claiming they had effectively said they want Hamas to remain in power, and accusing them of siding with mass murderers, rapists, baby killers, and kidnappers. This comes after the UK, France, and Canada released a joint statement earlier in the week opposing the expansion of Israeli military operations in Gaza. The BBC reports the statement demanding Israel halt its latest. The statement demanding Israel halts its latest offensive was widely viewed as the strongest criticism of Israel's military action since the war in Gaza began. It threatened concrete actions if Israel did not change course. On Wednesday, Sir Keir added that Israel's decision to allow only a small amount of aid into Gaza was utterly inadequate, and the UK suspended talks over a possible trade deal. In his video, Netanyahu said Hamas wanted to destroy Israel and annihilate the Jewish people. He said the Palestinian armed group had welcomed the joint UK, French, and Canadian criticism of Israel's war conduct. Of course, Hamas will welcome this statement, but that doesn't prevent the government from condemning Hamas too. So both criticism of Hamas and the actions of the Israeli government can exist simultaneously. However, we know there has been a long history of politicians and members of the public being accused of supporting Hamas simply for calling out the genocidal actions of Israel. Netanyahu said that the UK, France, and Netanyahu said that the UK, France, and Canada were on the wrong side of history. And you know what? I agree with him. Any country who has allowed Israel to go unchecked while committing a genocide for this length of time is on the wrong side of history. It's ironic hearing the man in charge of a country that is responsible for tens of thousands of civilian deaths, starving children, a humanitarian crisis, bombing of hospitals, aid workers, journalists, and children accuse other people of being on the wrong side of history. Noffel, do you think the UK is slowly coming to the realization that what many of us on the left have been saying for a long time now is true, that Israel are committing war crimes and genocide?
Well, the statement that UK and France put out, and Canada, is a move in the right direction. Right, they have aided and abetted a genocide for so long, and actions do speak louder than words. I do believe part of this did happen because there was a head nod from Trump just before the current military expansion happening in Gaza, where he was pressuring Netanyahu to sort of end this very soon. So is it coming from a place where they are genuinely wanting to hold Israel accountable fully? No. But if the actions are there to pressure Israel, I'm all for it personally. What's really interesting here is for Netanyahu and Israel as a whole, history starts on October the 7th, apparently. Nothing existed before that. But specifically, history in which Britain is complicit in genocide doesn't exist. It doesn't exist when we supply F-35 jets. It doesn't exist when we fly recon flights to help Israeli military aims. That was already apparently disclosed to be helpful in a private event in the British Museum recently. We're not complicit in that. What we are complicit in is when we eventually put out a rather milquetoast statement that they might possibly be committing and defying international law. That's apparently where we're on the wrong side of history, nothing before. There is a factor also of internal politics here, right? Netanyahu has been known within Israel to be a career politician. He's not someone that's looking to get out of power anytime soon. In fact, there are multiple different investigations that he has held against them, one for October the 7th and another for accepting bribery, right? And he knows that as soon as this offensive halts, he will be held accountable. So part of this is driving up theatrics to make sure that his coalition stays together. And what's particularly interesting is this is a moderate view in Israel. This is not what's considered a far right party, right? There's people like Ben Gvir and Smotrich that went far, far worse than Netanyahu. So us being completely angered in the West shows a completely different Overton window. Because as soon as we go back to the Middle East and we take a look at the Knesset in Israel, it paints a completely different story. Because the reality is, there's far, far worse that wants to happen, and I'm utterly shocked actually that after the complete horrific images that we're seeing come out of Gaza every 20 minutes of children with their limbs torn off, with people being burned alive, complete refugee camps totaled. Apparently, that's not us being on the wrong side of history. It's just when we ask for them to possibly consider that they're risking breaking international law.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of points to this story. We did cover the other day the initial statement that was put out, the joint statement, and we have covered that on this show in some detail earlier in the week. But this claim from Netanyahu that the UK, France, and Canada are siding with Hamas, that they're on the wrong side of history. I mean, Kemi Badenoch has come out and talked about the fact that she thinks it's rather telling that Hamas are applauding the UK for this decision. Well, of course they are. Of course they're applauding the UK for the decision. That doesn't mean that the UK are saying that they support Hamas. It doesn't say that they support the terror attack of October 7th. It doesn't say that they in any way endorse the actions of what is a prescribed terrorist organisation here in the UK. It simply shows that a group who have been fighting very viciously against the Israeli government for a long time now they're obviously going to welcome Israel's allies turning around and saying, actually, Israel, I think you might be going a bit too far. Of course they're going to welcome that.
Yeah.
Am I overreacting here to think that everyone else is overreacting by saying that we're somehow endorsing Hamas in that way?
No, because by Kemi Badenoch's logic, we should check exactly what the Knesset was saying around the time of the Conservative government, where they were aiding and abetting this the whole time, where they were pushing full licenses to the max, and people in the Knesset and statements put forward by Israeli politicians, which is included in the genocide case that South Africa put forward, statements of intent for genocide, right, were echoing how they can't wait. They absolutely can't wait to wreak havoc and reclaim Judea and Samaria and completely annihilate the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. So by that logic, we should completely hold the Conservatives accountable for that. Of course, what's so interesting is in this political landscape where they've just had local elections and the Conservatives are basically near extinct, they think it's a coherent political strategy to say, hey, Labour, you're actually not doing things shittily enough. Go further, do it worse. And I genuinely don't know what the strategy here is. She has to be one of the most uninspiring leaders of the Conservative Party I've ever had to witness. And that's saying a lot, consider the tenure we had with Liz Truss, Theresa May, and Rishi Sunak.
Well, obviously, Liz Truss is also of the belief that this is the wrong decision, and she seems to be siding with Netanyahu from what I saw on Twitter earlier today.
Of course,
But
yeah.
it is telling, isn't it, that when David Lammy stands in front of the Commons only a couple of days ago and talks about, we're sanctioning certain settlers. Daniela Weiss, for example, has had some sanctions against her. And we're putting our foot down and we're taking firm action and we'll go further if necessary. When asked what further action you think you will be taking, the best response he can turn around to one MP that asked him was, well, look in the dictionary of what the definition of further action is, and you'll get your answer. Like, he's not committing to anything, but repeatedly saying, yes, if needed, we will take further action. Okay, what needs to happen for further action to be taken? There was a report from the United Nations that suggested that 14,000 children could die in 48 hours. I know that there's since been some questions as to the accuracy of that figure. However, children are starving in Gaza. That is a fact. We know that children are starving in Gaza. We know that humanitarian aid now has been blocked for a significant amount of time from getting into Gaza to help these civilians that are suffering in there, both food aid, medical aid, water. And this isn't a new thing. I remember Keir Starmer taking to LBC at I was going to say at the beginning of all of this, but certainly at the beginning of this part of the 70-odd year conflict that's been going on, saying that Israel had the right to stop food and water from getting into Gaza. And now all of a sudden, the government are sort of thinking about it, and they're saying, oh, well, yeah, actually, maybe preventing entire groups of people from having access to aid and access to food and access to water, maybe that isn't a good thing. And I find it really interesting that all of these politicians and many journalists as well seem to all of a sudden have found a conscience. They've suddenly, it's like Jiminy Cricket's hopped onto the shoulder and gone, you do know genocide's bad, don't you? And they've gone, oh shit, yeah, I've never thought of that. Where do you think this has come from? I know you mentioned earlier, some pressure perhaps from Trump, but do you think it's all from there, or do you think there's there's some pressure coming from somewhere else, or do you think that it has just gotten to the point where even the neoliberals can't deny that what they are seeing unfold in front of them is horrific and shouldn't be happening?
I think it's a really good question. I think, to be fair, in this specific instance, I think there has been quite a bit of pressure from Trump, but I think it's getting to the point where there are certain events, unfortunately, not related to the humanity of Palestinians, but related to the humanity of other people. For example, we saw recently the shooting that happened in Washington with the two workers for Israeli embassy. Of course, that's a big spark of independent acts of violence within the West, right? Not within Palestine, where 2 people have been killed. So there's that. There's also recently where we saw Israel firing warning shots literally 3 feet away from diplomats from 25 different countries, from the UK, from France, from China, from Russia, from Ireland. I could go on, Egypt, Jordan. So there is a massive double standard here, unfortunately, that when it comes to political aims, things that Trump wants to do, which is seem as someone that's genuinely not starting any more conflicts within the Middle East, and there's political pressure to protect people's own diplomats, but not the humanity of Palestinians. That's where we decide to turn the tide. There is also a little bit just I want to touch on as well the fact that this is unlike many conflicts we've seen before where it's being live streamed. People have their phones, they have access to eSIMs, and they're able to record everything on their cameras and have it straight uploaded and seen by other people within spaces of 10, 15, 20 minutes. Back in the 90s and 2000s, we had US presidents calling up Israeli prime ministers and saying, look, what you're doing right now and the pictures that are circulating within the United States is a war of just babies being killed, right? Now take that, accelerate that about 5 times because of the rate of the uploading of things to the internet and the widespread availability of having a phone, and it genuinely torments you to think about the images that are coming out of Palestine daily. So there is a big impact there that we just live in an age where technology allows for us to see the horrors unveiling right in front of us, and it becomes so uncanny to the point where you can't pick up your phone without seeing what's happening in Palestine. And I think that really hits far closer to home than it had did 2-3 decades ago.
Why do you think then that politicians have found it so difficult to acknowledge what's going on? I mean, I think it was The Independent that recently released an article that suggested that Jeremy Corbyn was to blame, because of
Yeah.
the claims of anti-Semitism within the Labour Party, that Labour had to try so hard not to be seen as anti-Semitic. And let's just remind people that criticising the Israeli government, criticising the acts of the IDF is not the same as blaming an entire group of people for those actions. It is legitimate to criticise the actions of the Israeli government and not anti-Semitic to do so, and to
Yeah.
conflate the two, and to suggest or imply that the actions of Netanyahu and the Israeli government are somehow equivalent to or somehow the responsibility of the entire Jewish community is, in my view, anti-Semitic in and of itself. So this idea that Labour had to move away from seeming to be anti-Semitic, which, according to The Independent, meant that they couldn't criticise Israel. I mean, I think that's ludicrous, and I'll be honest with you, Noffel, I've forgotten what the question was I was putting to you, but
Yeah.
why do you think, yeah, why has it been so difficult for them? That was it. Because we've been seeing these images for years now. It's not that it's just in the last few months. So why has it been so difficult for our government to call a spade a spade?
It partly comes from the reason why we even helped set up Israel in the first place, and it wasn't for the humanity and dignity of Jewish people. In fact, during World War II, Churchill was known to be an anti Semite. He did not believe that Jewish people could integrate correctly within British society. They didn't like Jewish people. We weren't, this was around days of the empire still existing. So it's no wonder that there were deeply racist attitudes and anti Semitic ones existing within that part of the world. We helped to set up Israel because we thought it would have a strategic influence in the area, things like Suez Canal, and also opposing different Middle Eastern regimes that we planned on later coupping or seizing control of for their natural resources. And it's just the way that we have treated Israel for the last couple decades, right? For the last 70 odd years, it's just the way we have treated it. So it's no wonder that we're just following things by the textbook right now. And lastly, it's just because we never have really placed real pressure on them. Netanyahu's, the UK is on the wrong side of history isn't new. During the British Mandate, there was the King David hotel bombing, right? there has been deep resentment for the British for never putting pressure on the idea of a Jewish homeland. And even when they did, for example, in 1939, restricting immigration, Jewish immigration, for reasons specifically to not allow complete purchasing up of Palestinian land, there were far right militias that were deeply opposed from that. And to make sure they weren't implicated, people know this as part of the Black Sabbath, they bombed British military headquarters. So there has always been that aspect of non-pressure from the British state in order to make sure that the idea of I'm not going to say Jewish, I don't think Israel represents Jewish values, but a Zionist homeland is created in order to further their foreign policy goals. And that's just been the playbook that we've been abided by. And this is no different. Netanyahu isn't an independent character in this. He's a direct creation of the conditions we've set up in a settler colonial state.
Yeah. I do wonder on the wider point if more people are starting to have their eyes open to this nonsense idea that calling out the state of Israel for war crimes somehow equates to anti-Semitism. Because I've seen an increase in people that would have previously pointed the finger at the likes of Jeremy Corbyn and people that were out marching for a ceasefire, who would have previously called those people anti-Semitic for doing so, now taking to social media or, in the little interviews on the media or wherever, suddenly changing tune. And I think I have to wonder if Netanyahu accusing the government of essentially being terrorist sympathizers simply because the government have said, and not forcefully enough, in my opinion, that some of the actions that Israel are taking may be disproportionate in that, and they are starting to realize, oh, hang on a second, what Israel are doing is wrong. It's not okay. I've still, even despite listening to your answer there, I'm still a little bit unsure as to how it's taken so many people this long to come to that conclusion. But it's definitely, I think Netanyahu's response to this joint statement has definitely really shone light on the stupidity of this argument that calling out the state of Israel is somehow akin to anti-Semitism.
Yeah,
I don't know if you agree.
No, I do. I think there's, particularly from this conflict, there's only so many times that can be a valid argument. And I think, to be fair, people even on the right wing political aisle are getting quite tired of the idea of anti-Semitism because people also want money to stop going abroad. But I largely am in agreement with you in regards to that.
Yeah, well, I think we should probably move on, just looking at the time. But thank you for that, Noffel. And I do think it's interesting as well, just to add that, I think somebody's mentioned it in the comments, we're seeing even the likes of Piers Morgan has seemed to be changing tune on the thoughts to what's happening. So, better late than never, I suppose. But I just fear that, unfortunately, it's taken tens of thousands of innocent people to be killed before some of the people that have the most power have started to even consider maybe opening their eyes. I hope that Labour change direction and go firmer on Israel, but we'll have to wait and see. But we should move on to our next story. Justice Secretary Shabana Mahmood told the Commons on Thursday that she was examining whether she could force offenders, including paedophiles, to take pills or injections to suppress problematic sexual arousal. However, many leading experts have said that they would refuse to be part of the programme if it were mandated. Speaking to The Guardian, Professor Don Grubin, who worked on the 2007 pilot in HMP Watton in Nottinghamshire to medically manage sexual offenders who volunteered for treatment, said the following: "Doctors are not agents of social control. It would be ethically unsound to use medication to reduce risk rather than to treat a health indication. The problem with prescribing medication on a mandatory basis is that a doctor's role is to treat patients with their consent, not without it, particularly when medications can have significant side effects. Now, alongside the obvious ethical concerns surrounding this idea, many members of the LGBTQ plus community were quick to point out on social media that the historical use of chemically castrating people for being gay was something that this was widely used for, with many others raising concerns that trans individuals, who some worry may soon be unfairly prosecuted as sexual offenders simply for using the bathroom that aligns with their gender identity, may fall foul of this change and find themselves facing mandated chemical castration too. Noffel, do you think the state should be allowed to dictate chemical castration of offenders?
Absolutely not. It's never worked in history. When we bring up the famous case of Alan Turing, who was, forcibly given those things as he was gay, it ended up in him killing himself. There is no large amount of peer-reviewed data that suggests this sort of thing works. In the places we do have it, it's on a voluntary basis for people that feel like it's helped them. Even when we push that aside, though, it's controversial to talk about this in such a way because it comes across as almost, I've had conversations with people about this, as if you're trying to defend sex offender rights. But let me put it like this. Not many people believe in this country that the state is a democratic institution. There are different minorities which are constantly harmed for political gain or either for failings that go into this. We see it with the police all the time, for example, right? But we have seen it with the prison population all the time, especially in America, where black individuals are racist targets of systemic racism and then used as slave labor. When you talk about castration, especially for LGBT individuals, this is a large fear that people are allowed to have, especially because the idea of trans people being sexual predators is up in the air. There is no guiding on Labour describing them as anything else but biological men that are using predatory spaces. And whether you like it or not, when one group of people are affected by certain decisions, it gives leeway to other certain groups. It doesn't start off with, oh, well, we're only going to target sexual predators. It goes into innocent people. Now, we've seen this with Trump's deportations, for example. We're only going to get the most violent rapists and criminals and murderers and gang members out of our country. And it goes on to affect green card holders, people that shout and use their voice for Palestine. And it goes on to actually deport people that were never criminals in the first place. So people have valid fear about this to the individuals that think, well, this is quite clear cut. It's not. The institutions that we have created are often not democratic. And I don't understand why you'd put so much faith into that to think that they would be willing to actually use this properly. Just one more thing as well. This isn't, anyone that has sympathy with this, I completely understand, right? However, this isn't an in-look to delivering justice for people. It's to reduce prison population. It's not an inwards look to rehabilitate and bring justice to victims. It's simply because there's a failing on Labour to create public institutions that actually rehabilitate crime. And when you take a look at things like rape, I'm sorry, I'm going to use graphic language, right? So if anyone doesn't want to hear me talk about this, please just, by all means, it's quite a triggering topic. But when we talk about things like rape, it's also largely a gendered thing, right? You can't talk about rape and talk about biology without talking about misogyny. You can't talk about it without talking about power dynamics. You can't talk about it without talking about rehabilitation in order to mandate that women feel protected and that power imbalances are dissolved, whether it comes from in your workplace, whether it comes from underage individuals, whether it comes from the men in your family, because that's often where it happens. You cannot tell me that there's any sort of justice given to victims when you don't mandate anything for that. And so I think this is deeply, deeply flawed. I do not think this is anything pertaining to the justice an individual or a victim should get. But I think it's just literally to lessen a prison population that Labour aren't interested in actually have as a functioning way of rehabilitating people. And I also think it's a slight pander to the right, if I'm honest. I would love the idea of this. Use it on foreign criminals. Use it before you deport people. Use it on trans people. Do what you like.
Yeah, I think it would set a very dangerous precedent. Now, there are already trials of castration chemically being used on a voluntary basis, as you've alluded to, and the professor himself also has talked about that it can be effective in preventing reoffending, but it has to be with the consent of the offender. To me, something like this is akin to the death penalty. I'm against it, full stop. One, you've got the whole beyond reasonable doubt thing.
Yeah.
You've got. Oh, I appreciate it's very rare, but you've got the rare occasion when somebody gets found guilty of something that they are actually innocent of. There are some people that argue that chemical castration can be reversed, but when you're putting chemicals into somebody's body to have a detrimental effect on the function of their body for a crime that there's always a possibility they haven't committed, that in itself is also a concern. But also, it's the concerns that have been rightly raised by members of the LGBT community as well. We know historically this has been used. Excuse me. We know historically that this has been used against members of the LGBT community, and with the growing anti-trans rhetoric in this country, the growing rhetoric that trans women are somehow sexual predators trying to access men's spaces for unscrupulous reasons, the Supreme Court ruling and the potential. There was some reports today that the ECHR's guidance on the ruling would lead to trans individuals having to show passports before they use public toilets and single-sex spaces. The natural progression of some of these attacks on the trans community that we are seeing could lead to members of the trans community wrongly being convicted under laws around sexual offences. And if we were to end up in that situation, and I appreciate, I don't want to scare anybody, we're not in that situation right now, but there is a genuine fear amongst these communities that it could happen. If alongside that we're saying, yeah, well, we're going to mandate chemical castration on sex offenders, and we're then locking trans people up as sex offenders simply because they wanted to have a piss in the right toilet, in the right bathroom, we are going to end up in a situation where individuals are having their rights already taken away from them, but are then being forced to take medication that's going to have a detrimental impact on the function of their body, simply for wanting to live as who they are. And we've seen it happen historically with people that are gay. You talked about Alan Turing, so it's not beyond the realms of possibility that it could happen again. Put those two things together, that and the fact that there's always that possible doubt as to somebody's guilt. There's no way that they can mandate this. There's no ethical or moral way that they can mandate this. And when you've got leading experts that would be the ones having to carry this out themselves saying that it wouldn't work, it does raise quite a scary set of possibilities. The thing that worries me as well is that, as you've alluded to, this is about stopping reoffending. It's a preventative measure that is designed to let more prisoners out of prison, to free up some spaces in the prisons that are already overcrowded, and to prevent reoffending in a way that's very sort of cut and dry. Yeah, we'll give them a pill, we'll give them an injection, and then even if they try and reoffend, they won't be able to. Right, okay. And we'll do this because it'll free up spaces in prisons. Right, okay. Why not invest more in rehabilitation? Why not spend more money on actually, across all crimes, making sure that when prisoners come out, they are less likely to reoffend? Because the way in which the prison service is managed at the moment, it's very clear in the statistics and the research that people that go to prison are more likely to reoffend when they come out.
Yeah.
Because they're not being rehabilitated. They're not being rehabilitated. I was listening to LBC the other morning and they were talking about this topic, and a prison officer actually called in and he said he's worked with people who would beg him not to let them out of prison because they know that when they go out, they are going to reoffend.
Yeah.
How are we getting to the point where prisoners are going to prison? They are seeing the amount of their sentence that they're expected to actually carry out. And then on the day that they're being released, they're begging prison officers not to release them because they know that they say, I cannot help myself and I know that I will reoffend, so please don't let me out. To me, that is just more evidence that the prison system has failed them. That's a problem that is inherent with the prison system, inherent with the system itself. And I don't think chemical castration is the way to fix that, because the problem isn't the problem isn't something that a pill or an injection is going to fix. The problem for me is the deep failing that underpins the lack of rehabilitation within our prison service itself.
Yeah, I think it's really important to draw upon that. Um, Simply because prison should also be a place for victims to feel like they're getting justice, right? It should be something that mandates society as a whole to look at any society, cultural issues that are causing problems, for example. And like I said, sex crimes are largely gendered, right? It's inherently linked to violent attitudes and misogynistic attitudes amongst men. And I'll put this to people that think this may be effective. If you don't change the way in which these sort of things arise, whether that's how young women are viewed, whether that's there's something called the pyramid of harm, where it starts with just, locker and banter, and it goes to minor forms of sexual assault, and then it goes into power and control in relationships. If you don't seek to educate people about that and seek to create institutions that allow for that sort of ideas to be spread, and you simply say, going to ignore all of that, just going to use castration, you're not solving the root cause of the issue.
Yeah. But like you say, it panders to a certain demographic, doesn't it? Because it's the same sort of language that those on the right use. We've heard them talking about using the dinghies as target practice in the channel. We've heard them say, very blasé whenever anything comes up of anyone doing anything wrong. Oh, just give them the death penalty. We'll just bring the death penalty back. And it is definitely akin to that. It's aimed at, I think, appealing to a certain demographic of voter, with no intention of, like you say, of actually dealing with the root cause of these problems. I am just aware of the time. I think we should bring in our producer and start taking a look at some of your comments. Cog, are you there? You are on mute at the moment, Cog.
Yes, I should be. If people could just confirm that they can hear me. I was, in fact, talking while I was on mute like an absolute idiot.
We've all done it. I think they should be able to hear you now. We can certainly hear you anyway.
Superb. If you can hear me, that's good. I'm just going to wait to confirm that people in the chat can hear me, so that we know. Because I don't want to start talking.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Scottish Soul William. You are fantastic. Okay, let's get to some of the comments, beginning with some donations. So, first of all, thank you to Dominique, who gifted a Turn Left membership, to Elwyn, really appreciate it, and Specs Bean Farmer, who hit us with 10 Turn Left memberships.
Thank you, Specs.
One of them said it was their payday, and we really appreciate you coming out for us on your payday. That really helps, keeps us doing what we're doing, and we absolutely love you for it. So, going back to the first story, which is the winter fuel story, Zeke the Beast said, first of all, dang man, even the UK is sucking up to the wealthy by hurting the vulnerable. I wanted to just ask, not too long on this question, because it is sort of a side question, but why do you think that that is appealing often to the sorts of donors who will donate to the Labour Party and the Tory Party?
Oh, that's a good question. That is a good question. Specifically, sucking up to the wealthy by hurting that. Why hurting the vulnerable is appealing. It's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, I do feel like there is a listening to people talking about planned changes to child benefit. And some comments that Angela Rayner had made on LBC earlier. People were calling in who earn £50,000-60,000. Well, they earn over 50, which was where the debate was about getting child benefit. And they were complaining that it's not enough, and that £50,000 as an income isn't a lot nowadays. And I think there's a feeling that people who earn more than the average, people who are earning above average, sometimes feel like people that are earning less than them get given things out to them, and it's this nonsense argument that, oh well, I've worked hard to earn my money and I'm paying my taxes and my taxpayers' money's paying for all these lazy layabouts to sit on their arse and do nothing. And I think it's kind of appealing to that kind of rhetoric that well, if we take money from the more vulnerable, then your hard-earned taxpayers' money will be spent on more important things, like to be confirmed. We'll figure out where it's going to go, but at least we're not going to give it to all the scroungers. At least we're not going to give it to those people that are struggling on benefits, who can't be bothered working a day of their life. I think, and listen, I want to be very clear. I am not for a minute trying to say that people that are earning 50,000-60,000 pounds all think that way. I'm absolutely not saying that. But what I am saying is that there's definitely a feeling amongst people, certainly the very wealthy, the ultra wealthy, that people who earn less are somehow sponging off the state, and I think it's appealing to that. It's appealing to that idea, which is nonsense. And your income and your salary doesn't dictate how hard you work either. As I said last time, some of the most important jobs in society are paid the lowest wages. But I think it possibly comes from some of that rhetoric. Noffel, what do you think?
Zero-sum meritocracy almost.
Yeah.
Noffel, what do you think? Anything you'd like to add to that one?
I largely agree with Cal. Just literally the only thing to add is I think it's classic divide and conquer. It's basically the political strategy of a lot of people, and there might be a certain Labour electorate that might be drawn to it because they also feel like there's always this idea that you're going to win things in the centre too. So there's an aspect of that too.
Mm-hmm.
Alienation. You bring about a society that's more alienated. It's harder for people to look at things like their class interests.
Yeah. I mean, it might be wrong. There might be something more obvious there that I'm missing, but I certainly think that anti. I'm trying to think how to describe it. It's like going back 10, 15 years to the whole chavs thing, isn't it? This idea of putting people that in a lower earning demographic into this sort of group of all being lazy, layabouts who have no interest in the sponging off the state, when actually most people, about 40% of people claiming universal credit are in work, and even in recent history we've had nurses having to use food banks, so it's not as if the only people that need some sort of help and support are people that don't work.
Absolutely. So Vicky said tax it back, and I think we can sort of agree on this as a I think one of you might even have mentioned it. You shouldn't means test it. Obviously, just give them the money and then tax it back. It's a much more efficient way of doing the winter fuel payment, and a much more efficient way of making things fair. Yeah. And Jacqueline says, "Does so? This is in relation to the to both the first and second stories. Actually, does anyone think that this U-turn by the Labour Party on the winter fuel allowance could have anything to do with people discussed, not just on Starmer's domestic policies, but also on his foreign ones too? Of course, in relation to Israel. Do you think that these two stories could be linked? I thought it was an interesting question."
Well, I mean, it's clear that people are unhappy with Starmer's domestic policies. It's clear that a similar but also different demographic of the population are unhappy with his foreign policies. So yeah, I mean, I don't think it's beyond the realms of possibility to think that that's playing a part. I think what it boils down to is this desire to try and win back some of the lost votes. And if we accept that one of the reasons people are unhappy with Labour and Starmer are because of his domestic policies, and that another reason that so many are unhappy are because of his foreign policies, then yes, I suppose the idea to U-turn on the winter fuel allowance is probably a step in the direction of trying to put right some of the mistakes that they've made. I don't think it's going to work, though. I think it's too late.
Yeah, no, I largely agree. I think, listen, the discontent from Labour isn't just from one thing; it's multiple different things. Just also trying to rebrand themselves as a Tory-like party. So, of course, while the winter fuel allowance was one way in which people were annoyed, the amalgamation over the last couple of months of Labour basically doing fuck all, but say we're blue, we're basically red Tories, has meant people are extremely pissed. And especially when they're trying to pander to reform, there is a build-up of a collective anger where people are saying, "You're not a Labour Party I recognise anymore, and I'm not just pissed off at you for this, but I'm going to punish you for everything else you've done too."
Yes, yeah, it's holistic. I think I tend to agree. So Specs Bean Farmer said, well reserved, turn left, work hard. Plus, I always do gifts because this community rocks. We really appreciate
Thank you.
that. I just wanted to bring that one in before we go on to the next story because I do want to emphasise we do have a fantastic community here. I'm always really impressed by the questions that come out and the depth of perspective that we get from different people. And sometimes we just get some great memes, like Flow Snake saying "face meets leopard" when it comes to Starmer being accused of anti-Semitism by or being pro-Hamas by Benjamin Netanyahu.
Yeah.
And I think that's absolutely correct. We did have an interesting question, actually. Tracy Eva said, "Do you all think the UK are finally going to recognise the Palestinian state?" And also followed up with saying, "I think they will. Actually, think they will because of pressure from France." Are we in agreement with this?
Yeah, so it's interesting because Lammy made it very clear multiple times when speaking in the comments the other day that Labour had made it clear in their manifesto that they would recognise a Palestinian state when appropriate to do so. My question to the Labour Party is, what needs to happen before you think it's appropriate to recognise a Palestinian state? Because they keep talking about a two-state solution. They keep talking about recognising Palestine. They were keen to point out that there are talks and deals, and forgive me, I've forgotten exactly. There's a conference of sorts taking place, I think later this week or over the weekend, that Lamy kept referring to, sort of saying, well, let's wait and see what happens there. So I think the indication from the government at the moment is that yes, they are going to recognise a Palestinian state. It's just a matter of when. But there's also a lot of concern amongst, a lot of desire amongst members of Parliament that Parliament should have a vote on recognising a Palestinian state as well. And it seems at the moment that the government are reluctant to do that. It's not wholly clear why. But yeah, I do. I think it's inevitable now. I think they can't argue for a two-state solution if they aren't willing to recognise one of the two states.
Well, I'm not convinced personally. The way I see it is Britain, Canada, and France still are very much having leaders that want to stick to the centre right neoliberal agenda, and as far as I've seen, there is no implication of even allowing for international consensus to rule over domestic ideas. We see this all the time with even the Conservatives within the UK. Our foreign policy has always come down to, we'll handle it internally, we won't take into account what people are saying internationally. Now, the thing that Britain, France, and the UK have in common, like I've said, they're centre-right neoliberals. They want a common sense agenda, and I think it's all words. It's all they do. It's all words. It's not enough action. Until I see a shifting to actual abiding with wall-to-wall consensus within the international community rather than relying on domestic policy, so they can historically, as they have, block a recognition of a Palestinian state. I'm not buying it, unfortunately.
Well, on seeing action, so the sort of the conference that I was referring to before is actually started today, and it is ongoing conversations as to whether or not Western states should recognise a Palestinian state. I'm just reading here from The Guardian, where a senior Arab diplomat in London said, if you asked me a fortnight ago if there will be wider recognition of Palestine by Western states, I would have said no, but now I'm not so sure. And, Lammy is involved with these talks. So it's going to be interesting to see. I think I'm a little bit more hopeful than you, but I would still question why it's taken so long. And don't get me wrong, I welcome the joint statement between France and Canada and the UK. I welcome the fact that some sanctions have been taken on Israeli settlers, like Daniela Weiss. I welcome the fact that David Lammy is in talks as to whether or not to recognise a Palestinian state. But I do have to be critical and say, why the hell has it taken this long?
I tend to agree generally more with Noffel. My skepticism has gone quite far. Like, I do appreciate what you're saying, Cal.
But that's understandable.
Think,
sorry to interrupt, Cog, but like I said, it's taken them so long to get to this stage. Why on earth? Why on earth would you believe that they are going to do it? Because they haven't so far.
I also think that any pledge written down by Keir Starmer or endorsed by Keir Starmer, you can almost guarantee that the opposite is what's going to happen. So if he writes something down, I'm almost inclined to believe the opposite, because I think that's always a big factor in all this. Just Adam said, I just wanted to state our position on this absolutely clearly. Adam said, 2 out of 3 of the last Labour MPs are war criminals. That's mad as fuck. In America, yeah, but in the UK, I presume that Adam meant that in the UK they're also war criminals. The leaders are also war criminals. I would totally agree, and I don't think we disagree on that. I just want to emphasise that. And then going back to another comment by Tracy, Tracy said the USA is being sidelined across the globe. This is a factor in this sudden hostility towards Israel. I just wanted to highlight this because I had something to say about this, and that's that I don't think that any of this is a coincidence with Trump stepping away from Netanyahu. So much as with Putin in Russia, Trump got very, very close to Netanyahu and was hoping, well, I can resolve this quickly with a nice, quick peace deal. It will make me look great, and then I can take credit for the peace deal because Joe Biden was just too stupid to do it. And then he's gotten close to these people, realised that these people are, well, not realised that these people are fucking scum. He probably already realised they were fucking scum, but they were fucking scum who are really difficult to work with, and has now landed himself in a situation where he's like, oh, actually, they're not giving me what I want, so I'm going to storm off in a strop. And because America has now stormed off in a strop from Russia and from Israel, it's meant that both states are now in a weaker position than they were at the start of Trump's term. I think that's a big factor in all this. I did also want to say, in response to the whole, Hamas is celebrating from Netanyahu and Badenoch saying, Hamas is celebrating the decision by the UK to issue a statement of condemnation. I'd say, first of all, a stop clock is right twice a day, right? There was a time when Boris Johnson condemned Donald Trump, okay? And if Boris Johnson had watched Normal Island, if it had been running back then, and agreed with us condemning Trump, that wouldn't be bad, and that wouldn't be a bad position for us to take, just because Boris Johnson also agreed with us and Boris Johnson is bad. Like, the two things can exist at the same time. I just wanted to give that as a little analogy. Did you guys want to jump in on that question quickly?
Nothing?
No, I'm pretty much in agreement with you on that.
Awesome. Yeah, no, same. It's interesting, isn't it, that I think Trump's second term has definitely completely changed the state of global politics. For better or worse, I think is yet to be seen, although I would probably say for worse at the moment.
Absolutely. So we'll quickly do chemical castration, words which I didn't think I'd be saying on a Monday night.
We will move on to the story about chemical castration.
Yes. Sorry, Friday night, isn't it? It's Friday, not Monday.
Yes, it is Friday.
I'm keeping track of what day it is. Right. And Natalie quite rightly says chemical castration was last used on gay men like Alan Turing and will be used against trans people without a doubt.
Without a doubt.
I think that's really important it's really important, particularly to hear trans people saying that. And
Just to add on that
Go for it.
quickly as well, that, I think it's also extremely important to take a look at what's been happening in the last couple of months with trans people in general within the US, because we've had them kicked off Medicare and Medicaid, which is 152,000 adults left without gender affirming care. We have already gone through all the legal loopholes, intrusive legal loopholes, may I add, to simply consent to a procedure which should already be an informed consent model. 152,000 people. We're talking about people that are living off barely anything, right? It's a complete legislative effort to quite literally wipe out these people from existence, because we know what happens when you freeze people that are in dire need of gender affirming care. And so we also saw the transfer of trans women to men's prisons. So there is no doubt in my mind that these institutions that we held to be democratic and so upholding of minorities' rights are in any way or form going to abuse this. I started with the Cash report. Now we've gone to the Supreme Court. There is no doubt in my mind that anyone can tell me otherwise, that this will be used for the wrong reason towards a minority that are already being portrayed as sexual predators. And may I add, I also think there could be a storm kicked up to use this on foreign criminals, or this idea of rapists from abroad. It's
And
not at all going to be used in a positive way.
But that's a really interesting point, because the other thing is that there'll be many people, probably not watching us, I doubt, but you never know, they might be, who would argue that this government wouldn't do that, the Labour government wouldn't do that, they wouldn't allow it to go that far. I probably wouldn't agree with that. I think yes, they probably would allow it to go that far, but if the Labour government make it so that they can mandate chemical castration, I am still firmly in the belief now that we are going to see a Reform UK government in 2029. I really, really hope that I am proved wrong. I've never wanted to be more wrong about something in my life than I do about this, but unfortunately, I do think that's where we're heading, to a Reform UK government with a lower vote share than what Labour got in July last year. And if that happens, if the government now set laws in motion that give the state the ability to mandate chemical castrations on certain criminals, then future governments will be able to use that against a wider state of people that they choose to define as criminals. And even if the Labour government don't say, well, we're going to use it on asylum seekers that are coming into the country, there's no reason I can see why Reform UK wouldn't do that, especially if it was already legally allowed in this country for the state to do that. It's going to be very easy for them to brand a certain demographic of people as being rapists and paedophiles simply because of the colour of their skin or the country of origin, and use that against them. So even if you are thinking that, a Labour government wouldn't let it go that far, you sure as hell better believe that a Reform UK government would.
100%.
Absolutely. It's
and for the record, I unfortunately, I think with this Labour government, I think they would also allow it to go that far.
Yes, it's it almost seems like a comparison which doesn't get to the horror of this particular move, but it does sort of remind me of the way that the Labour government brought in PFIs, or the Labour government brought in tuition fees and had them at £2,000, and then when the coalition government took over, it was privatisation of the NHS in a more active and wider manner, and of course the expansion of tuition fees to £9,000 per year. Like, it's almost like Labour drill a hole in the wall and then the Conservatives kick it and make it bigger. But of course, Reform UK would be taking a full jackhammer to that wall. Like, there's going to be no. They're going to be worse. I did seek out a couple of comments that I thought disagreed with our position, because I, like you guys, am sort of on the side of, like, I think that chemical castration is a terrible idea. It's a terrible thing to introduce into our justice system. It's a terrible power to give the state. It's not to do with whether or not these people deserve it. It's to do with what do you allow the state to get away with. Adam said they do this in the US. It does reduce sexual offences. If it works to protect women and kids, it's worth considering, though. Um, so, first of all, initial thoughts. I'll ask you guys first.
Well, I mean, it's not going to protect women and kids, is it? Because the vast majority of rapes in this country don't even make it to court. So um, given if we lived in a society where 98% of rape cases were actually convicted and actually saw a conviction, I still would be against it, by the way, because I just disagree with state mandated harm on anybody, full stop. But if we lived in a country where 98% of rape cases actually made it to a conviction, then that argument, of, well, it might protect women and children, may be a valid argument. But when we live in a world where 98% of cases don't even make it to court, this idea that it would protect women and children, in my opinion, it's got no backing at all. Because if it prevents 0.5% of those cases, the other 99.5% of those attacks are still going to take place. To me, that isn't protecting women and children. What will protect women and children is better rehabilitation, more education for boys and young men on issues around misogyny and what isn't acceptable, more education and training in the workplace and in schools about stamping out what Noffa was talking about earlier in terms of like the locker room talk and the sort of lads being lads crap around, we're just making a joke and whatever, and more men having the balls to stand up and speak out when they hear their own friends and people in their own circle using harmful, misogynistic language. Because let's be honest, there is a direct correlation between men who think it's okay to make misogynistic jokes to men who think it's okay to make sexually inappropriate comments to women that they may work with or that they may be in the circle with, to then men who think it's appropriate to touch women inappropriately, then to men who think it's appropriate to go the whole way and sexually assault women, all the way up to rape. There is a link and a correlation between all of these things, and men who have a higher rate of one of the quote unquote lesser offences are statistically more likely to commit the more violent acts. So if we really want to protect women and children, we need to stamp out those issues. We need to start actually convicting rapists, and we need to start finding ways within the prison service to successfully rehabilitate people so that they don't reoffend. Chemical castration on the tiny, tiny number of people that actually get convicted is just a drop in the ocean, in my opinion.
Yeah, I largely agree with that. I think the benefits aren't really there en masse compared to the cons. Like, if it happens to be that there are some people that are protected by this, sure, that's brilliant. Even if we ignore like everything that Cal said about the stepping stones that we need to ensure to make sure the root cause of these social issues are also weeded out. If we even put that aside, let's say this does work for a percentage of the population. Are you seriously comfortable with giving that power to the state and giving them the trust that it won't be used negatively? And if reform make massive gains, or there's another race riot, or there's something else, that Labour won't go the full length and decide to actually start using this on people? Or if Rachel Reeves' fiscal headroom is completely blown out the water and they need to do more austerity cuts to public services, especially things like prisons that sometimes are funded by taxes, not all of them are private, do you believe they're not going to go full, they're not going to start targeting certain minorities and make another appeal to the right to say, we're going to use this here in order to make sure these people come out earlier and their prison sentences are reduced and our public finances can go? So it's really about, do you really have a good amount of trust and faith that this will go according to plan, even if it benefits people?
Yeah, I agree. I would say on the question of deterrence, I argue a lot about the death penalty on TikTok. I tend to go up if there's a debate going on about it, because I'm really opposed to the death penalty. One of the reasons that I oppose it so much is because deterrence theory, when it comes to crime, often doesn't work. It works up to a point. However, US states which have the death penalty have a higher homicide rate than those that don't. So the death penalty, either it's encouraging homicide, which I don't think it is, or there's actually no correlation. And in fact, you're better at looking at the underlying causes. But there's another nastier effect which cruel and unusual punishment can have on the justice system. And this is the way that Harold Wilson, the Labour Prime Minister, argued a bunch of Conservatives into abolishing the death penalty here in the UK between 1964 and 1969, by pointing out that it actually makes it harder to get the conviction past a jury. And when you have CPS data suggesting that in 2021, less than 1.3% of rape cases which were reported to the police actually resulted in a charge, not just a conviction, but a charge, and that's only those that were reported to the police, right? When you've got those sorts of figures, anything that might deter a jury from issuing a conviction, i.e. any sentence which might seem like it is too harsh, too permanent, too cruel, is bound to land you in a situation where it's actually harder to get a conviction. And that was exactly what Harold Wilson said about the death penalty, to persuade the Conservatives, saying, like, it's actually, you end up letting people off scot-free because you end up in a situation where the sexual offenders, and remember that sexual offences covers so many different types of crime, that it actually means that the things that are even harder to convict, like just sexual assault that isn't classed as rape, is getting that past a jury, and with the risk of chemical castration, almost impossible. If somebody thinks, well, if I vote guilty, if I put forward a guilty plea, this person could end up being chemically castrated, and if there's any doubt, then I'm going to be living with that for the rest of my life.
Well,
that's horrific.
Yeah, and there's a strong argument, and it came up again recently after the latest miscarriage of justice that we saw. I've forgotten the gentleman's name, forgive me, from Birkenhead, who was finally released from prison after new DNA evidence shown that he hadn't committed the violent crime that he'd been sent to prison for. But this guy had written he'd signed a confession, but obviously when you do that, you get a lesser sentence. And I think we need to change the way in which the justice system works. I think I don't think we should give lighter sentences to people that plead guilty, because it incentivizes people who are actually innocent to plead guilty if they feel as though it's stacked against them and they're going to be convicted one way or another anyway, even if they're innocent. And once you've pleaded guilty, people can easily argue, well, you said you were guilty, so it's beyond reasonable doubt now because you admitted to it. So I think we need to remove that from the system. What do you both think about the trials at the moment, and the fact that, the way it is currently, where chemical castration is used but on a voluntary basis? So sex offenders who opt to have that carried out do so. Do you? Because I think I would say that is okay. I say so hesitantly, but I think if you are an offender and you're saying, yes, please, I'm happy to take part in this. I know Shabana Mahmood's talked about wanting to extend out more voluntary chemical castration as well, and give more offenders the option to take part in that. How do you guys feel about that on a voluntary basis?
I'm just worried that if it's not paired with a comprehensive program to understand that a lot of these things are social as well. One, it leans into the narrative that I am just naturally aggressive and I can't help myself and I need to get castrated. It's not worth me going to a like a criminologist that deals with psychological issues, or the state mandating for that to occur. I'm afraid that it just puts people in the position where they fall into quite the misogynistic idea that I can't help myself, I need this because I'm a monster, and it, almost like putting no accountability on their actions. And secondly, if prisons are as overrun as they are now, who's to say people are going to look at this as a way to get out early and have no intention on changing their actions?
That's true. And then in that sense, then I suppose it would almost become coercive, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
It's also one of the dangers of it is the cumulative radicalization effect. The idea that you introduce it on a voluntary basis, and what's almost happened is happening, where governments want to, because unfortunately there is this thing, particularly when it's surrounding sexual crimes. Sexual crimes. I'm used to talking in TikTok language where you have to say smexual instead of sexual. When it comes to sexual crimes, of what I'd call the "look at me, I'm the whip hand" effect, where people go, "Look at me, I'm willing to be the most harsh on these crimes. I disagree the most vehemently with these crimes," and they make a big show of it. And what that's designed to do is designed to avoid introspection and alienate the individual who's like performing the action from any potential association with those crimes. Like, we all need to be looking introspectively at the way that our society is set up to ignore questions of consent, and particularly when it comes to women and girls, and respect for their consent, and the normalization of disrespect for women's consent and well-being, just as it is. And with that in mind, Luna said medical procedures should always be with consent, and I think
and I do think there is a sense of irony here as well, isn't there, of a ban on puberty blockers for trans people who know what they want, who understand their needs, and who are consenting to taking something that will help them live as who they are, being banned because so many accuse it of essentially chemically castrating children or young people. And then the same government that would ban puberty blockers on that basis, talking about mandating chemical castration as a punishment for individuals that have committed sexual offences. It's like when you've got people who want to consent to something that will actually help improve their lives, reduce their risk of suicide, improve their standard of living, you're saying, no, you can't do that because it's akin to chemical castration, so we can't have you doing that. And then on the flip side saying, let's chemically castrate all the sexual offenders. There's a bit of an irony there as well, isn't there?
Absolutely, and it's what the pro-life people, the people who are opposed to abortion, don't often get, is that the reason that particularly medically invasive violations of your bodily autonomy, the reason that they are so prohibited, is because of the unique place that your body has in the world and in your autonomy. It's not just another piece of property. Your body is where your subjective world meets your objective world, right? It is the body through which we experience the world. That requires special protection when it comes to invasion within it. And it really does. And that's at the end of the day, that's got to play a part in it. Somebody's right to their bodily autonomy and freedom from medically invasive procedures has got to play a right in this. But no one likes to talk about this because everybody wants to be on the bandwagon of, look, I'm willing to be the most harsh on the disgusting paedophiles, when actually that's a slippery slope to a nasty world.
Well, I mean, it's like the far right like to always shout the loudest about the grooming gangs, but they're quite happy to endorse MPs like James McMurdoch, who literally have criminal records of violence against women. So,
Absolutely. Superb. Any final comments before we close off?
None from me, I don't think. Nothing.
Neither.
All right.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Cog. Grateful for your time as always, and thanks for producing. It's always good to have you there. Well, I suppose that's all that we have time for then. Thank you so much, Nofal, for joining me this evening. Brilliant insights as always. It's always good to have you on the show. So thank you for your time.
No problem.
And thanks again to all of you, our viewers as well, who have tuned in. And remember, like the stream. If you're not a subscriber, then make sure to hit that subscribe button as well. If you want us to grow, then you can head over to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support. There is a link to our Patreon there where you can support us monthly, or you can follow the other links to give us a one-time, one-off contribution. Alternatively, you can become a YouTube member for just 99p. And remember, we are also available now over on Facebook as well. As you'll know, we've got some very exciting things coming up over the coming weeks. We've already mentioned that we will be covering the Media and Democracy Festival next weekend with a fantastic lineup of speakers. We're going to be there all day talking to people who have been speaking. We're going to be getting some exclusive interviews with some of the key speakers as well, and we're going to be making some fantastic content for you.
For the last 45
none of which would be possible without your support as well. So thank you again to those of you that have contributed. And a big shout out to Graham Turner, who I see has just donated $4.99 as well. Alongside that, I will be out and about tomorrow with the wonderful Sarah Dalal, and we're going to be covering the dubbed, as it's been dubbed, Great British National Strike, which is an interesting one that's taking place tomorrow across the country in a city near you. There are counter demos taking place tomorrow as well. So have a look online in your local area to see what demos are taking place. I know certainly in Lancashire there are a number of anti-racist protests taking place to counter the Great British National Strike, which is essentially a protest. But yeah, stay tuned for our channel for more coverage of that. Thank you again to everyone for your comments and for being just a fantastic community. We are grateful for each and every one of you. So yeah, thanks again. Good night. I'm Callum Taylor, and we'll see you next time.